You know, this morning when I came in and I took our azalea bush off the floor in front of the windows and I put it up here, I thought, I think it's asking me for a drink. And so I gave it a drink, and in the last 3.5 hours, some of the buds have begun to open. They're not tight. They begin to open. It's kind of like when we go to God and we say, God, I'm thirsty for your presence, I'm thirsty for your attention, I'm thirsty for your love. God says, drink. And we come alive, right? How's that for a sermon? Might be better than the one I've got written here. Some say that the reason that we judge other people is because we are worried. Yeah, that sounds right, but I think sometimes we also judge because we're cranky and tired and irritable. That was definitely me yesterday. It had been a busy and a full week, and then on Friday, which is supposed to be my day off, I had to go to Marysville for a required training event if I wanted to have a job beginning in July of 2020. So with the ferry waits, and waits and waits and waits, especially coming home and all that driving time and all the class time, not even counting the 2 hours I'd done before I ever left home to get ready for the event. It was a 15.5-hour work day. Did I mention that that was my day off? This is for a job that might not still be there in 2020? I don't know. Our denomination's in an uproar. I think it'll still be here. My job will still be. I think we'll still have a church. I don't know what the denomination will look like, but it's going to look different, and we're all kind of anxious about that, so it'll probably be around. It might not be. I don't know. After General Conference, my anxiety, my heartbreak for both myself and for all of you has been really high, and it's made me a little bit bitter and somewhat cynical. Did I say I spent 15.5 hours working on my day off? It was really excellent training, I have to say that. It was superb training. But it was still my day off, and I got home after 8:30, and Lane was still at work, and all there was in the house for dinner was leftovers from a restaurant dinner, so it was only really half a dinner. And then yesterday I had to get up again, and I had to drive to Brownsville for another event. You were all invited, most of you didn't show up. Actually, I didn't really expect most of you to show up. The meeting was about the same as General Conference, and what are we going to do about LGBTQ, and our district superintendent led this meeting and wanted to have answers for us, which of course he had very few answers, and he wanted to give a chance for questions, and you were all invited, but we already had some of those sessions here, so I really didn't expect you to show up, but thank you Jim and Judith and Roland for going. But I had to go. I'd already worked about 65 hours this week, and I knew the district superintendent was going to be there, and I'd already skipped the district training event the weekend before. I was sick, so it was legitimate, but I couldn't skip this one too. I was worried what the district superintendent would say. So there I was at Brownsville United Methodist Church, tired and irritated. My butt was still hurting from the day before, 15.5 hours. But when the people started arriving at Brownsville, I was able to put a smile on my face and help welcome them and do my part to hand out papers and be part of the event. It was much better than sitting. But then they started passing the microphone around for those questions and people to make comments, and my judgment meter went into overdrive. They have a lousy sound system, don't you know? And it kept clicking on and off. Why couldn't they get it to work right? And the room was way too warm. I really hope that microphone part doesn't go too long. Now, I totally disagreed with that man when he said that. Doesn't he know that's what a Pharisee does? And Jesus condemned those Pharisees. But this other woman, I could agree with what she said, but my heart breaks for her because it's really sad what the church has done to her. And then they started doing Holy Communion. And since I got to help serve, which is always my joy, I was up front so that I saw that when they uncovered the bread, somebody had already broken it. We hadn't even blessed it and somebody broke it. Who would do such a thing? And why are those people standing over there behind me while I'm trying to serve Holy Communion and they're talking loudly? Can't they see we're in the middle of a holy moment? And then there are those people that are walking past me to get out of the room and they kept bumping my elbow. Can't you see I'm holding the chalice? This is a holy moment. Can't you just wait 5 minutes for the closing prayer? I just want to go home. And I sure hope those drivers in front of me on the road aren't too pokey. And then I remembered a post I had seen on Facebook, you know, one of those picture memes, and it said, you notice how those who drive faster than you are crazy drivers, and those who drive slower are just idiots? How ridiculous I am being, how critical, how judgmental I am being. And really, I know it's because I'm tired, and I'm anxious, and I'm worried. And I knew that no matter what anybody else thought of me, including the district superintendent, I knew Jesus would have been disappointed in me. Don't judge, Jesus said, so that you won't be judged the same way. Stop focusing on other people and what they are doing and how they are doing it. Stop judging and condemning them. The speck in their eye is nothing compared to the log in yours, and their speck is really no concern of yours. Focus instead on what you are doing and how you are behaving, and work on getting that log out of your own eye. The judgment that you dole out to others will come back on you. So don't judge, ever, right? Well, not quite right, because even yesterday at that meeting, when what each of us was expected to do was to listen to the things that were being told, to listen carefully and to be open to hearing something that might perhaps be new, and to assess, to judge what we were hearing and what we should do with that information and how we should respond. We make judgments all the time. You and I. Is this milk still good to drink? Should we proceed through this intersection? Does it sound like that right total on the invoice we've been asked to pay? Even news about somebody, some person, when it filters through to you, we have to judge on whether or not that news is reliable. If somebody told me that they had heard you were running around the streets naked, I would not believe them, because I know you. There was one person that I would have believed once upon a time. That's not you. And so until I had further information, I would judge that rumor to be false. And if that rumor proved true, then I would judge you in need of mental health. But this kind of judging, this is not what Jesus is actually talking about. When Jesus says, do not judge, he's talking about something else. Jesus is talking about the judgment that leads to condemning people, that leads to putting people in their place. It's the kind of judgment that leads us to pat ourselves on the back because we're not that kind of people. We want to be able to say, thank you, God, I'm not like other people, robbers and evildoers and adulterers, or even like that tax collector. Jesus is talking about the kind of judging that is not interested in forgiveness, or understanding, or reconciliation. That's the kind of judging Jesus says not to do. Jesus says there's a problem with an attitude of putting people down when you think they are wrong, rather than finding a way to build them up well. Jesus is talking about the kind of judging that lacks caring for another person, that does not care if the other person has a heart of Jesus or not, that does not care about whether or not the other person even knows Jesus. Jesus says, don't judge the kind of judging that gets in the way of the other person even experiencing the love of God. Don't judge in a way that leads a person away from God rather than toward. when we do that kind of judging, then we become the stumbling block. And honestly, when we judge others with that kind of judging, not only does it come back on us, but it also becomes a stumbling block for us, keeping us from coming closer to God. The kind of judging that Jesus does is a loving, forgiving, compassionate, upbuilding love. The kind of love or judging that Jesus does is not condemning. So how does worry come into all of that? Well, I think when we're busy judging other people, we know in our heart of hearts that other people are also possibly busy judging us. And so we start judging ourselves. And sometimes we let ourselves off the hook because we really aren't as bad as other people. I know I don't drive pokey or crazy like other people. But sometimes the reverse is true too. Sometimes we judge ourselves most harshly. Sometimes we're most critical of ourselves. And sometimes in judging ourselves, we're also most off base. We are trained early and frequently to judge. Use your manners, get good grades, don't wear those colors together. That is inappropriate behavior. What will the neighbors say? And your behavior reflects on your mother and me. And it continues into adulthood, even into senior years, right? Are you eating right? Do you exercise enough? Are you saving enough for retirement? Are you buying the right brands? Are you voting for the right person? Are you backing the right cause? Whether or not others are really observing us and judging us, we are often definitely judging ourselves and worrying about the answers. Somehow we came up with this idea that if we live a certain way and check all the certain blanks and dot all the dots and cross all the T's in just the right order, that the secret formula will have been met and everything in our lives will work out wonderfully, perfectly. And then something doesn't happen right or wonderfully and we start to go back and see, what did we pick wrong? What did we check wrong? We look for someone to blame. And sometimes we do blame others. And sometimes we blame ourselves, but either way, we end up crippling ourselves. Sometimes we cripple ourselves emotionally, sometimes we cripple ourselves physically, and we definitely cripple ourselves spiritually. Jesus says, where your treasure is, there your heart is. So often we read this to be about financial treasure, but what if what we're actually doing is living so that the grand prize is somebody else's favorable judgment of us? What if the real treasure, the real prize, is God's judgment of us? God tells us directly that God does not judge as people do, by outward appearances, but God judges by looking at our inward thoughts, by looking at our intentions and our motivations. Jesus tells us that God did not send Jesus to condemn, but to save. And that God's judgment comes through the heart of Jesus. That God's judgment comes through Jesus with forgiveness and with grace. So the Apostle Paul writes, he writes to Peter, cast all your anxiety on Jesus, because Jesus cares for you and loves you. And Paul writes to the church in Philippi, don't worry about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, give your request to God. The peace of God will watch over you. And that heart of Jesus is really important. If we want to be disciples of Jesus, if we want to be followers of Jesus, we need that heart of Jesus. And one of the first things we have to do is stop judging others and stop judging ourselves. Let God do the judging. And let us be the recipients of the grace and forgiveness and the conduits by which that is shared beyond ourselves. Because when God looks at you, God sees somebody really beautiful. God sees somebody precious. God sees somebody that looks an awful lot like God. And God says, beloved, marvelous, my child, receive my grace.